The automatic doors of Manhattan General Hospital burst open with a violent whoosh, and Sarah Mitchell stumbled through them like a woman fleeing a nightmare. At 38 years old and 6 months pregnant, she should have been glowing with that mythical pregnancy radiance everyone talked about. Instead, blood trickled from a gash above her left eyebrow, and her designer maternity dress was torn at the shoulder. "Get your hands off me!" she shouted, though no one was touching her. The words seemed to echo from some deeper trauma, bouncing off the sterile walls of the emergency room like ricocheting bullets. Behind her, the doors opened again with considerably less drama. Derek Mitchell strode through with the confident gait of a man accustomed to getting his way in every room he entered. At 42, the millionaire real estate developer carried himself like he owned not just the luxury apartments he built, but the very air people breathed inside them. "Ma'am, please calm down. You're bleeding," said Nurse Jenny Rodriguez, her Brooklyn accent cutting through the chaos as she approached with practiced efficiency. She had seen enough domestic situations in her 15 years at Manhattan General to recognize the signs, even when they walked through the door wearing $1,000 shoes. "I'm fine," Sarah whispered, her soft southern accent making the lie sound almost believable. "Really, I just fell. It was so clumsy of me." Derek's voice boomed across the waiting room, ensuring every person present could hear his version of events. 3 stairs. "Sarah? 3. How clumsy can one person be? I keep telling her to be more careful, especially in her condition, but she just won't listen." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that particular hospital pallor that made everyone look slightly ill. Sarah touched her belly protectively, feeling the baby shift inside her as if sensing the tension that had become their constant companion these past months. "Sir, your wife needs stitches," Nurse Jenny said firmly, positioning herself between Derek and Sarah with the subtle skill of someone who had done this before. "The head wound is deeper than it looks. Please wait outside while we get her into a room." "I'm not leaving my wife," Derek replied, his tone shifting from concerned husband to annoyed customer service complaint. "Do you know who I am? I've donated significant money to this hospital. I have connections on the board." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar wave of embarrassment wash over her. This was how it always went. Derek's charm and wealth opened doors. His temper and control slammed them shut. She had learned to navigate the space between his public persona and private reality like walking through a minefield blindfolded. "Derek, please just let them help me," she said quietly, the words barely audible above the constant background noise of the ER, monitors beeping, phones ringing, the soft squeak of rubber soles on linoleum floors. A young resident approached with a clipboard, his white coat still crisp enough to suggest he hadn't been on shift very long. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Patel. Can you tell me what happened tonight?" Sarah's mouth opened, then closed. The truth sat on her tongue like a stone she couldn't swallow or spit out. Derek had pushed her, not down 3 stairs as he kept insisting, but 5. And it hadn't been an accident. It had happened because she'd asked about the credit card statement that showed a charge for jewelry she'd never received, flowers she'd never seen, dinners at restaurants she'd never been to. "She fell down the stairs outside our building," Derek answered before Sarah could speak. "Pregnancy makes women so emotional, so unsteady. The hormones, you know how it is." Dr. Patel looked between them, his dark eyes taking in details that his medical training had taught him to notice. The angle of the cut on Sarah's forehead, the defensive way she held her arms, the controlling way Derek positioned himself in the conversation. "I need to examine Mrs. Mitchell privately," Dr. Patel said. "Hospital policy for all head injuries." "That's ridiculous," Derek protested. "I'm her husband. I have every right to be present during her medical treatment." Nurse Jenny stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with difficult family members before. "Sir, you can wait in the family area. We'll update you as soon as possible." The curtain around bed 7 swished closed with a finality that muffled Derek's continued protests. For the first time in hours, Sarah felt like she could breathe without measuring each inhalation against Derek's mood. "Okay, honey," Nurse Jenny said, her voice gentling now that they were alone. "Let's get you cleaned up and see what we're dealing with. How far along are you?" 24 weeks, Sarah replied, accepting the hospital gown Jenny offered. The baby's been moving a lot tonight. I think all the stress upset her. Her, Jenny smiled as she began cleaning the wound with practiced gentleness. You know it's a girl. We found out last month. Derek wanted a boy, but I'm happy either way. I just want her to be healthy. Sarah's voice caught slightly on the last word, and she wondered if her definition of healthy was the same as other mothers. Would her daughter be healthy if she grew up watching her father treat her mother like property? Would she learn that love meant accepting whatever treatment you received? This is going to need about 6 stitches, Jenny said, examining the cut more closely. It's clean, though. Should heal nicely. How did you say this happened again? Sarah stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in the acoustic panels. She had become an expert at finding patterns in mundane things during uncomfortable conversations. I fell down some stairs. I've been so clumsy lately. Jenny nodded, but her expression suggested she had heard this particular explanation before. Dr. Patel will be back in a few minutes to stitch you up. Is there anyone you'd like us to call, family members who could come sit with you? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications Sarah wasn't ready to examine. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 16. She had grown up in the care of her godfather, but she hadn't spoken to him in months. Derek had a way of gradually isolating her from other relationships, always with reasonable explanations that made her feel selfish for wanting to maintain connections outside their marriage. No, Sarah said finally. There's no one to call. Outside the curtain, the emergency room continued its late-night rhythm. Ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Somewhere a child was crying, and a television in the waiting area droned with the endless cycle of overnight news. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her life might look like if she were someone else, someone braver, someone who hadn't learned to make herself smaller to fit into the spaces her husband allowed her to occupy. The sound of the curtain rings sliding open made her eyes snap back to the present. Dr. Patel returned with a suture kit, but something in his expression had changed. He looked more alert, more focused. Mrs. Mitchell, there's been a slight change in your case assignment. Dr. Sterling is going to take over your care. He was finishing surgery when your case came in, and he specifically requested to see you. Sarah's heart stopped for a full beat, then began racing so fast she was sure the monitors would start alarming. Dr. Marcus Sterling, her godfather, the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle and helped her with calculus homework and walked her down the aisle at her wedding because her father couldn't. The billionaire surgeon who had built his fortune as much through shrewd investments as through saving lives. She hadn't seen him in 6 months. Not since the awkward dinner where Derek had dominated the conversation and made subtle comments about Marcus being too old to understand modern marriage dynamics. After that night, the calls and invitations had gradually stopped coming, and Sarah had told herself it was natural for relationships to change when people got married. Now, as footsteps approached the curtain with the measured pace of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions, Sarah realized she was about to face the one person who had known her long enough to see through the careful facades she had learned to construct. The one person who might ask the questions she wasn't ready to answer. The curtain slid open once more, and Dr. Marcus Sterling stepped inside, his silver hair catching the harsh, fluorescent light, and his pale blue eyes immediately finding hers with the intensity that had made him one of the most respected surgeons on the East Coast. Sarah Elizabeth, he said, his deep voice carrying just a hint of his Boston accent. My God, what happened to you? 20 minutes had passed since Sarah had been sequestered behind the hospital curtain, but to her it felt like hours. The antiseptic smell of the emergency room had become overwhelming, mixing with the metallic taste of fear that seemed permanently lodged in her throat. When the curtain parted and Dr. Marcus Sterling stepped inside, Sarah felt something inside her chest crack open like an egg. At 62, Marcus Sterling commanded attention without demanding it. His presence filled the small space around bed 7 with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Tonight, however, his usual surgeon's composure flickered when his eyes took in the full extent of Sarah's injuries. Uncle Marcus! Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended, using the childhood name she hadn't spoken in months. What are you doing here? Marcus approached the bed with careful steps, his trained eyes cataloging details with the precision that had made him legendary among his colleagues. The cut on her forehead was clean but deep. The bruising around her left shoulder was fresh but not from tonight. The way she held her arms suggested defensive injuries that went beyond a simple fall. "I was finishing surgery when they called me about a domestic disturbance case," he said, his voice gentler than she had heard it in years. "I never imagined I'd find you here, sweetheart. Never imagined it would be you." The endearment hit Sarah like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had called her sweetheart and meant it as comfort rather than manipulation? When was the last time someone had looked at her with concern that didn't come attached to conditions and expectations? "It's not what you think," she said quickly, the words automatic after months of practice. I fell down some stairs. Derek was right behind me, trying to help. "I've just been so clumsy lately with the pregnancy hormones and everything." Marcus pulled up the small rolling stool and sat down so his eyes were level with hers. It was a gesture she remembered from childhood, when he would lower himself to her height to discuss scraped knees or hurt feelings with the same seriousness he brought to consulting on complex surgical cases. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I've been treating trauma patients for 35 years. I know what fall injuries look like, and I know what assault injuries look like. These bruises on your shoulder are at least 3 days old. The cut on your head came from impact with a sharp edge, not from tumbling downstairs." Sarah's hands moved instinctively to cover her belly, as if she could protect her unborn daughter from hearing these words. "You don't understand. Marriage is complicated. Derek has been under a lot of stress with his business, and I've been emotional lately. Sometimes I overreact to things." "How long has this been happening?" Marcus asked, his surgeon's mask slipping to reveal the man who had once bandaged her scraped elbows and read her bedtime stories. The question hung between them like a bridge. Sarah wasn't sure she had the courage to cross. "How do you tell the man who taught you to ride a bike that your marriage is falling apart? That the successful businessman he toasted at your wedding pushes you around like a piece of furniture? That you've become someone you don't recognize? Someone who apologizes for breathing too loudly?" "It's not happening," she whispered, but even as she said it, the words felt hollow. "Derek loves me. He takes care of me. He provides for me. I have everything any woman could want." Marcus reached for her medical chart, scanning it with the focused attention he brought to all diagnoses. "According to this, you've been in the ER 3 times in the past 6 months, sprained wrist from falling off a curb, bruised ribs from slipping in the shower, and now this head injury from falling downstairs." "Sarah, that's not clumsiness. That's a pattern." "You're making it sound worse than it is," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Derek never means to hurt me. He just gets frustrated sometimes, and I can be difficult. I ask too many questions about things that aren't my business." "Like what?" Marcus asked. "Like credit card statements and phone calls and why he needs to work so late so often?" The words tumbled out before Sarah could stop them. "But he's right. Those things aren't my concern. I should trust him to handle our finances and his business without interfering." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity he usually reserved for examining x-rays and surgical plans. "The Sarah I raised would never accept that explanation. The Sarah I know would ask questions about anything that affected her life. What happened to that woman?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow because she had been asking herself the same thing for months. When had she stopped trusting her own instincts? When had she started second-guessing every thought and feeling? When had she learned to make herself smaller and quieter to avoid triggering Derek's anger? "People change when they get married," she said finally. "You learn to compromise. You learn to put your partner's needs first." "Compromise is about finding middle ground," Marcus replied. "It's not about erasing yourself to accommodate someone else's control issues." Before Sarah could respond, the curtain rings rattled, and Derek's voice announced his presence before he became visible. "Sarah, honey, are you doing okay in there? The nurses won't tell me anything, and I'm getting worried." Marcus stood up, his full height and presence creating a barrier between Sarah and the curtain opening. When Derek stepped inside, his expression immediately shifted from concerned husband to deferential businessman. Sarah watched the transformation with fascination and horror, recognizing the calculating look that crossed Derek's features when he encountered someone who might be useful to him. "Dr. Sterling," Derek's voice rose with manufactured enthusiasm. "What an incredible honor. I had no idea you were working tonight. I'm Derek Mitchell, Sarah's husband. We met briefly at the hospital fundraising gala last spring. I remember, Marcus replied, his tone professional but noticeably cool. Please explain to me how your pregnant wife ended up bleeding in my emergency room. Derek launched into his prepared narrative with the polish of someone who had been practicing the story in his head. Sarah's pregnancy had made her emotional and unsteady. She had been having what he diplomatically called episodes of irrational behavior. Tonight, she had stormed out of their apartment after an argument about something trivial, and in her emotional state, she had missed her footing on the exterior stairs of their building. I was right behind her, trying to calm her down, Derek said, his voice carrying just the right note of concerned frustration. But you know how pregnant women can be. The hormones make them unpredictable. I've been trying to get her to see someone about the mood swings, but she refuses to admit there's a problem. Sarah felt herself shrinking inside her own skin as Derek painted her as an unstable, emotional woman who couldn't be trusted to walk downstairs without supervision. The worst part was how reasonable he made it sound, how he positioned himself as the long-suffering husband dealing with a wife who had become a liability. Is that what happened, Sarah? Marcus asked, his eyes finding hers across the small space. Sarah started, then stopped. The truth sat in her throat like a stone, but Derek's presence made it impossible to speak. She could feel his expectations pressing against her like a physical weight, demanding that she confirm his version of events. She's been having trouble with reality lately, Derek continued when Sarah hesitated. Imagining conflicts that didn't happen, accusing me of things that never occurred. Her therapist thinks it might be pregnancy-related anxiety, but I'm starting to worry it's something more serious. Marcus nodded slowly, and for a moment Sarah thought he might actually believe Derek's explanation. Her heart sank as she imagined being dismissed as another hysterical pregnant woman whose hormones had made her unreliable. She had seen it happen to other women, had watched doctors nod sympathetically while discounting everything their female patients said. That's certainly possible, Marcus said carefully. Pregnancy can affect cognitive function and emotional regulation. We should definitely run some tests to rule out any underlying conditions. Derek's smile was triumphant, but Sarah caught something in Marcus's expression that suggested the conversation wasn't over. There was a glint in his pale blue eyes that reminded her of the way he used to look when he was working through a particularly complex surgical problem. In fact, Marcus continued, I think Sarah should stay overnight for observation. Head injuries can be unpredictable, especially in pregnant patients. We need to monitor her for signs of concussion and make sure the baby isn't showing any stress responses to the trauma. That's not necessary, Derek said quickly. Sarah will be more comfortable at home, in familiar surroundings. I can keep an eye on her. I'm afraid I have to insist, Marcus replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. As her attending physician, I'm responsible for her care while she's in this hospital. And my medical opinion is that she needs professional monitoring for the next 24 hours. Sarah watched the two men face off across her hospital bed, understanding that they were having a conversation that went far beyond medical necessity. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she recognized the warning signs of his anger beginning to build. Dr. Sterling, Derek said, his voice still pleasant, but with an edge Sarah had learned to fear. I appreciate your thoroughness, but I think you're being overly cautious. Sarah has always been prone to dramatic interpretations of minor incidents. A night in the hospital will just feed into her tendency toward hypochondria. Nevertheless, Marcus replied firmly, she's staying. As if summoned by the rising tension, Nurse Jenny appeared at the curtain opening. Dr. Sterling, there's a phone call for you at the nurse's station. They said it was urgent. Marcus looked reluctant to leave but nodded. I'll be right back. Sarah, don't go anywhere. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Derek moved closer to Sarah's bed, his concerned husband mask slipping just enough for her to see the anger underneath. What did you tell him? He asked quietly. Nothing, Sarah whispered. I told him exactly what you said happened. Good, Derek said, but his eyes remained hard. Because if you start filling his head with your paranoid fantasies, it's going to cause problems for both of us. Dr. Sterling is a powerful man in this city. We don't want to make an enemy of him over your emotional instability. Sarah nodded, but something had shifted inside her during the conversation with Marcus. For the first time in months, someone had looked at her injuries with professional eyes and seen what she had been afraid to acknowledge. Someone had asked the questions she had been afraid to answer. And somewhere in the distance, a phone was ringing with news that would change everything. Derek's voice shifted like a radio changing stations the moment Dr. Marcus Sterling disappeared around the corner toward the nurse's station. The concerned husband frequency gave way to something harder, more calculating, as he moved closer to Sarah's hospital bed. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a threat. "I know what you're thinking. You see your rich godfather, and you think this is your chance to play the victim, but before you say something you'll regret. Remember what's at stake here." Sarah's hand moved protectively to her belly, where their daughter seemed to be responding to the tension with increased movement. "Derek, I haven't said anything. I told him exactly what you wanted me to say. And you'll keep telling that story," Derek continued, "because the alternative isn't just bad for me, it's bad for you too. Do you think any court in this country would give custody of our child to a woman with a documented history of mental instability? A woman who's been hospitalized multiple times for injuries she can't remember getting?" The threat hung between them like poison gas, invisible but deadly. Sarah had learned to read the subtle shifts in Derek's tone that preceded his most effective psychological attacks. He never raised his voice in public, never made threats that could be overheard or recorded. His weapon of choice was her own fear, carefully cultivated and expertly wielded. "I'm not going to say anything different," Sarah said quietly. "Can we please just get through tonight?" Derek's expression softened into the concerned husband mask as footsteps approached in the hallway. By the time Dr. Sterling returned, Derek was gently adjusting Sarah's hospital blanket and asking if she needed anything for her comfort. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Derek asked, the endearment delivered with perfect pitch to sound loving rather than possessive. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, his sharp eyes taking in the scene with the trained observation of someone accustomed to reading subtle cues. "Just checking on my wife," Derek replied. "She looks tired. Are you sure keeping her here overnight is necessary? Our apartment is only 10 minutes away, and I could bring her back immediately if any symptoms developed." Marcus studied Derek with the same intensity he brought to examining suspicious x-rays. "Actually, I wanted to discuss something with both of you. Sarah's medical records show this is her third emergency room visit in 6 months. That's unusual for a healthy woman in her 30s. Derek's smile never wavered, but Sarah caught the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes that signaled danger. "Sarah's always been accident-prone," he said with fond exasperation. "Even when we were dating, she was constantly tripping over things or walking into doors. I used to joke that she needed a full-time bodyguard." "The previous injuries were also falls?" Marcus asked. "Sprained wrist from catching herself wrong when she tripped on a sidewalk curb," Derek recited smoothly. "Bruised ribs from slipping in our shower, which has been on my list to get fixed for months. And now this tumble down the stairs. Like I said, pregnancy has made her even more unsteady than usual." Sarah listened to her husband recite the catalog of her injuries with the detached precision of someone reading a grocery list. Each incident had been carefully explained away, each bruise and cut transformed into evidence of her own inadequacy rather than his violence. "Have you considered that there might be an underlying medical condition causing these falls?" Marcus asked. "Inner ear problems, blood sugar issues, neurological conditions." "That's an excellent question," Derek said, his businessman's instincts sensing an opportunity. "I've been trying to get Sarah to see a specialist, but she's been resistant to the idea. She gets defensive when I suggest there might be something wrong." Marcus turned to Sarah. "What do you think? Have you noticed any dizziness, balance problems, episodes where you feel disoriented?" The question was a trap, and Sarah knew it. If she said yes, she would be confirming Derek's narrative that something was medically wrong with her. If she said no, she would be contradicting the explanation for her injuries. Either way, Derek would use her answer to support his version of events. "I've been tired lately," she said carefully. "The pregnancy has been more difficult than I expected, but I don't think there's anything seriously wrong with me. Fatigue can definitely affect coordination," Marcus agreed. "But given the frequency and severity of these incidents, I think some additional testing would be prudent. Blood work to check for anemia, thyroid function, blood sugar levels, maybe an MRI to rule out any neurological issues. Derek nodded enthusiastically. Whatever you think is best. Dr. Sterling, I want Sarah and the baby to be as healthy as possible. Cost isn't a factor. Obviously. The casual mention of money was perfectly timed. Sarah realized. Derek was reminding Marcus that they were wealthy patients, the kind who generated significant revenue for the hospital and whose satisfaction mattered to administrators. He was also positioning himself as the devoted husband, willing to spare no expense for his wife's care. The testing can wait until after the baby is born, Marcus said. For now, let's focus on monitoring Sarah's recovery from tonight's injury and making sure there are no complications with the pregnancy. Of course, Derek agreed. Should I plan to stay here with her tonight? I could sleep in the chair if necessary. That won't be necessary, Marcus replied. Sarah needs rest, and hospitals aren't comfortable places for family members to spend the night. Why don't you go home, get some sleep, and come back in the morning? Sarah felt a moment of panic at the thought of Derek leaving. As much as his presence frightened her, his absence meant being alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that she couldn't continue living this way. It meant facing the questions Marcus might ask without Derek there to provide the approved answers. I hate to leave her alone, Derek said, playing the reluctant husband perfectly. What if she needs something during the night? The nursing staff will take excellent care of her, Marcus assured him, and I'll be checking on her personally throughout my shift. Derek leaned down to kiss Sarah's forehead, his lips lingering just long enough to whisper, "Remember what we talked about, honey? I love you, and I'll see you first thing in the morning." To anyone watching, it looked like a tender goodbye between devoted spouses. But Sarah heard the warning embedded in the endearment, felt the subtle pressure of his fingers on her shoulder that reminded her of his strength and her vulnerability. "I love you too," she replied automatically, the words as rehearsed as everything else in their public performance. After Derek left, the small space around Sarah's bed felt simultaneously larger and more intimate. Marcus pulled up the rolling stool again and sat down, his presence both comforting and intimidating. "Now then," he said quietly, "would you like to tell me what really happened tonight?" Sarah stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny holes in the acoustic panels while searching for words that wouldn't betray her husband or condemn herself. "I told you. I fell down the stairs. Derek was trying to help me." "Sarah," Marcus said gently, "I've known you since you were 8 years old. I know when you're lying, and I know when you're scared. Right now, you're both." The observation hit Sarah like a physical blow because it was so accurate and so impossible to deny. She was lying, and she was scared, and the fact that Marcus could see through her careful facades made her feel simultaneously exposed and hopeful. "Even if something else happened," she said carefully, "what would be the point of talking about it? It's not like anything would change." "Why wouldn't anything change?" "Because Derek is right about one thing. Who would believe me? He's a successful businessman with connections and money and a reputation in this city. I'm just a pregnant woman with a history of accidents and emotional problems." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity that had made him one of the most respected diagnosticians on the East Coast. "What kind of emotional problems?" Sarah hesitated, then decided that partial truth might be safer than complete lies. "I've been seeing a therapist for anxiety and depression. Derek thinks it's pregnancy-related, but it started before I got pregnant. I've been having trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating, trouble trusting my own memory about things." "When did these symptoms begin?" "About a year ago, maybe longer. It's hard to say exactly when it started." "What does your therapist think is causing the anxiety and depression?" Sarah's hands twisted in the hospital blanket as she searched for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "She thinks it might be related to unresolved grief from my parents' death, or adjustment issues with married life, or just my personality. Some people are naturally more anxious than others." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "All of those are possibilities. But there's another possibility we should consider." "What's that?" "That your anxiety and depression are symptoms of trauma? That your memory problems and concentration issues are your mind's way of protecting you from experiences too painful to fully process." The words hung between them like a diagnosis Sarah wasn't ready to receive. She had spent months convincing herself that the problem was inside her head, That if she could just be stronger or smarter or more accommodating, Derek would stop hurting her. The idea that her symptoms might be normal responses to abnormal treatment was both terrifying and liberating. "I should let you rest," Marcus said, standing up from the stool. "But Sarah, I want you to know that whatever is happening in your life, you're not alone. You have options, and you have people who care about you. That hasn't changed just because you got married." As he moved toward the curtain, Sarah felt a moment of desperate courage. "Uncle Marcus," he turned back, eyebrows raised. "If someone were in a situation where they needed help but couldn't ask for it directly, what would you advise them to do?" Marcus returned to her bedside, his expression gentle but serious. "I would tell that person that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. And I would tell them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone else to help you carry a burden that's too heavy to bear alone." After he left, Sarah lay in the darkened hospital room listening to the sounds of the night shift. Somewhere down the hall, a baby was crying. Outside her window, ambulance sirens wailed in the distance. And in her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything. Sarah's phone buzzed against her hip with the insistent vibration of an incoming message. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet hospital room, where the only other noises were the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the distant murmur of nurses making their rounds. She fumbled for the device with hands that trembled slightly, either from exhaustion or the lingering effects of shock. The message was from Mrs. Thompson, the 73-year-old widow who lived in the apartment next to Sarah and Derek's building. Eleanor Thompson had been a fixture in the neighborhood for 40 years. One of those elderly women who seemed to see everything from her strategically positioned kitchen window while appearing to mind her own business. "Sarah, honey, I saw everything from my window tonight. That man pushed you down those stairs on purpose. I recorded it on my phone. Are you okay? Please call me back when you can. I'm worried sick about you and the baby." Sarah stared at the message until the words blurred together, her heart hammering so hard she was certain the cardiac monitors would start alarming. Mrs. Thompson had witnessed what really happened. More than that, she had recorded it. The evidence Derek had spent an hour carefully explaining away actually existed, captured in digital pixels that couldn't be manipulated or dismissed. Her finger hovered over the delete button, Derek's warnings echoing in her mind. But before she could erase the message, footsteps approached her cubicle, and Dr. Sterling's voice carried through the thin curtain. "Sarah, are you awake? I wanted to check on you before my next surgery." "Come in," she called, hastily sliding the phone under her blanket. Marcus entered with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to moving through hospitals in the middle of the night. He carried a tablet and wore the focused expression of a surgeon reviewing case notes, but his eyes immediately went to Sarah's face with the concerned attention of a surrogate father. "How are you feeling? Any nausea, dizziness, blurred vision?" "No, nothing like that. Just tired." Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, but the phone felt like it was burning against her leg through the hospital blanket. Marcus pulled up the rolling stool and opened his tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be her medical records. "I've been reviewing your file from tonight, and something's been bothering me. The angle of your head injury isn't consistent with a forward fall downstairs." Sarah's mouth went dry. "What do you mean? When someone falls forward, they typically sustain injuries to their knees, palms, maybe their forehead if they don't get their hands up in time. But your injury is on the left side of your head, suggesting lateral impact. As if you hit something while falling sideways or were struck from the side." The clinical description of her trauma felt surreal, like listening to someone analyze a crime scene from a television show rather than discussing her own body. "I'm not sure I remember exactly how I fell. Everything happened so fast." Marcus set down the tablet and leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to the gentle tone she remembered from childhood conversations about difficult topics. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you tell me stays between us unless you give me permission to share it. Doctor-patient confidentiality applies even when the doctor happens to be your godfather." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Did Derek push you tonight?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, daring her to finally speak the truth she had been protecting with lies and silence. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her phone, feeling the weight of Mrs. Thompson's message and the evidence it promised. She started, then stopped. Years of gaslighting had trained her to doubt her own perceptions, to question her memories, to assume that her version of events must be flawed if it contradicted Derek's narrative. Sarah, Marcus said gently, I've treated hundreds of domestic violence cases over the years. I know what the injuries look like, and I know how victims are trained to protect their abusers. You don't have to be afraid of telling me the truth. The words domestic violence hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had never applied that label to her situation, had never thought of herself as one of those women she sometimes saw on news programs or read about in articles. Those were other women, weaker women, women who didn't have college degrees and comfortable homes, and millionaire husbands who bought them expensive jewelry and took them to charity galas. Derek isn't a violent person, she said automatically. He's just been under a lot of stress lately with his business, and I can be difficult sometimes. I ask too many questions about things that aren't really my concern. What kinds of questions? About credit card statements, about why he needs to work late so often, about phone calls he takes in private. The words tumbled out before Sarah could stop them. Months of suppressed concerns finally finding voice. Those sound like reasonable questions for a wife to ask, Marcus observed. That's what I thought. But Derek says marriage requires trust, and constantly questioning him shows that I don't trust him. He says it's insulting and hurtful, and that I'm being paranoid because of my anxiety issues. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing her words with the same methodical approach he brought to complex diagnoses. What happened tonight when you asked about the credit card statement? Sarah's phone buzzed again, the vibration a reminder of the evidence sitting in Mrs. Thompson's phone. There was a charge for jewelry I never received, flowers that never came to our apartment, dinner at a restaurant I've never been to. When I asked Derek about it, he said I was being suspicious and accusatory. And then what happened? He got angry. Really angry. He said I was questioning his integrity, that I was acting like he was a criminal instead of a husband who works hard to provide for his family. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. He said I was becoming like my mother? Marcus's expression sharpened. What did he mean by that? My mother used to question my father about his business dealings. Derek says she was paranoid and controlling, and that it destroyed their marriage. He says I'm developing the same toxic patterns, and that if I don't stop, I'll destroy our marriage too. Sarah, your parents had one of the strongest marriages I've ever seen. Your mother wasn't paranoid or controlling. She was your father's closest advisor and business partner. They made every major decision together. The contradiction hit Sarah like cold water, shocking her out of the carefully constructed narrative Derek had been building about her family history. She had started to believe his version of her parents' relationship, had begun to doubt her own childhood memories of two people who clearly loved and respected each other. Then why would Derek say that? Because rewriting your family history is one of the classic tactics of psychological abuse. If he can convince you that your role models for healthy relationships were actually dysfunctional, it becomes easier to accept dysfunction as normal in your own marriage. The term psychological abuse joined domestic violence in Sarah's mental catalog of labels she wasn't ready to accept. But even as her mind rejected the clinical terminology, her body recognized the truth of Marcus's words. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she had been holding her breath for months and was finally allowing herself to exhale. What happened after Derek got angry about the credit card questions? Marcus asked gently. He said I needed to learn to trust him like a proper wife should. He said constant questioning was a form of emotional abuse, and that I was damaging our relationship with my suspicious nature. Sarah paused, remembering the escalating argument with crystal clarity for the first time in hours. I tried to apologize and explain that I wasn't trying to be suspicious, but he said my apologies were manipulative, that I was trying to make him feel guilty for defending himself against my accusations. How did you end up outside on the stairs? I said I needed some air, that maybe we should both take a break from the conversation and talk about it later when we were calmer. Derek said that was typical, that I always tried to run away from problems instead of facing them like an adult. Marcus leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her words. Did he follow you outside? Sarah's phone buzzed a third time. Mrs. Thompson's continued concern adding weight to the truth she was finally ready to speak. Yes, he followed me onto the landing and said we were going to finish the conversation right then. He said he was tired of me walking away every time he tried to address my behavioral problems. And then, I told him I wasn't walking away. I was just trying to give us both space to cool down. I said we could talk more productively if we weren't both angry. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the moment with painful clarity. That's when he grabbed my shoulders and said I was manipulating the situation, trying to make him look like the bad guy when I was the one causing problems. Did he push you then? He said I needed to learn that actions have consequences, that I couldn't keep questioning him and expecting there to be no response. He said I was pushing him to his limit, and that if I pushed too far, I might not like what happened next. Marcus waited, understanding that she needed to tell the story at her own pace. I tried to turn around and go back inside, but he grabbed my arm and said we weren't done talking. When I pulled away from him, Sarah's voice broke slightly. He pushed me hard. I lost my balance and fell down the stairs, and all I could think about was protecting the baby. The admission hung between them like a bridge finally built after months of careful construction. Sarah felt simultaneously relieved and terrified, as if she had just stepped off a cliff and wasn't sure whether she would fly or fall. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Marcus said quietly. "I know how difficult that was." Sarah's phone buzzed again, and this time she pulled it out, showing Marcus the screen with Mrs. Thompson's messages. "My neighbor saw everything. She recorded it on her phone." Marcus read the messages, his expression growing more serious with each word. "This changes everything. Sarah, you have a witness and video evidence. Derek can't explain away what Mrs. Thompson recorded. But what if no one believes her? What if Derek convinces people that she's just a confused old woman who misunderstood what she saw? Mrs. Thompson is 73 years old and has lived in that building for 4 decades. She's sharp as a tack and has no reason to lie about what she witnessed. More importantly, you have corroborating evidence in your medical records, a pattern of injuries that supports her account." Sarah felt a flutter of something that might have been hope, quickly followed by a wave of familiar fear. "Derek will say I'm having another one of my episodes. He'll say the pregnancy has made me delusional, and that I've somehow convinced Mrs. Thompson to support my fantasies." "Let him try," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to winning difficult battles. "I'm not just your godfather, Sarah. I'm also a billionaire with significant influence in this city. I have resources Derek doesn't know about, and I have connections that extend far beyond his real estate business." The reminder of Marcus's wealth and power created a new dynamic in Sarah's mental calculus. For months, Derek had used his millionaire status and business connections as weapons to ensure her compliance. The implicit threat had always been that he could destroy her financially and socially if she crossed him. But Marcus operated in a different stratosphere entirely, where billionaire ex-husband surgeon Godfather trumped millionaire abusive husband in every meaningful way. "What do I do now?" Sarah asked. "First, we get Mrs. Thompson's video evidence secured and documented. Then we make sure you and the baby are safe while we figure out the next steps. But Sarah, you need to understand that once we start down this path, there's no going back. Derek will escalate when he realizes he's losing control." Before Sarah could respond, footsteps approached rapidly in the hallway, and Derek's voice carried through the curtain with barely controlled anger. "Where is she? I want to see my wife right now." Marcus stood up, moving between Sarah's bed and the curtain entrance, with the protective instincts of someone who had spent decades defending the vulnerable. "It's after midnight. Mr. Mitchell, visiting hours are over." "Don't give me visiting hours," Derek snapped, his careful public persona finally cracking. "That's my wife and my unborn child. I have every right to see them whenever I want." "Actually," Marcus replied calmly, "as her attending physician, I determine what's in Sarah's best medical interest. And right now, she needs rest without disturbance." Sarah listened to the confrontation with growing terror, recognizing the escalation in Derek's voice that preceded his most dangerous moments. He had discovered something, or suspected something, and was coming to reassert control before she could slip away from him entirely. Her phone buzzed one final time with a message that made her blood run cold. "Derek just came to my apartment asking questions about what I might have seen tonight. I didn't answer the door, but I think he knows I witnessed what happened. Be careful, sweetheart." The game had changed, and Derek was making his move. Derek's voice carried through the emergency room with the dangerous edge Sarah had learned to fear most. controlled fury masquerading as righteous indignation. She could hear him at the nurse's station, his tone shifting between charming persuasion and barely veiled threats as he tried to convince the staff to let him see her. "I understand hospital policies," Derek was saying, "but surely an exception can be made for a concerned husband. My wife was seriously injured tonight, and I need to make sure she's receiving proper care." Marcus moved closer to Sarah's bed, his presence both protective and reassuring. "He can't get back here without permission from the attending physician," he said quietly. "And I'm not giving that permission." Sarah's hands shook as she clutched her phone. Mrs. Thompson's warning about Derek's visit playing over and over in her mind. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows Mrs. Thompson saw what happened, and now he's trying to figure out what she might have told people." "That actually works in our favor," Marcus replied. "If Derek is trying to control the narrative, it means he's worried about what the truth might reveal. Innocent people don't usually spend their time coaching witnesses." The sound of Derek's footsteps approached their curtained area, accompanied by Nurse Jenny's firm voice. "Sir, I've already explained that patients need rest. You can return during regular visiting hours tomorrow morning." "This is ridiculous," Derek said, close enough now that Sarah could hear the tight control in his voice. "I want to speak to whoever is in charge here. This is completely unacceptable treatment for a family member." "Dr. Sterling is the attending physician on this case," Jenny replied evenly. "He's available to discuss your wife's care with you if you'd like to step into the consultation room." Sarah caught Marcus's eye and nodded slightly. She understood what he was offering, a chance to face Derek with backup, to have someone else witness his behavior when he thought no one important was watching. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus called out, "why don't you join me in the family consultation room? We can discuss Sarah's treatment plan." There was a pause before Derek's voice returned, carefully modulated back to concerned husband mode. "Of course, Dr. Sterling. Thank you for accommodating my worry about my wife." Marcus squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently. "I'll be back in a few minutes. If you need anything at all, press the call button and ask for Jenny specifically." After they left, Sarah lay in the quiet darkness, listening to her own heartbeat and feeling the baby's movements slow to the peaceful rhythm of sleep. For the first time in months, she felt a strange sense of clarity, as if the fog that had been clouding her thinking was finally beginning to lift. She thought about Mrs. Thompson's video, concrete evidence that Derek couldn't explain away or manipulate. She thought about Marcus's resources and connections, a safety net she hadn't realized she still had access to. Most importantly, she thought about the conversation they just had, the first time in months that someone had listened to her version of events without immediately suggesting she was mistaken or overreacting. Her phone rang, Mrs. Thompson's name appearing on the screen. "Sarah, honey, are you okay?" The elderly woman's voice was thick with concern and something that might have been fear. "I'm in the hospital, but I'm safe," Sarah said quietly. "Mrs. Thompson, Derek came to your apartment about an hour ago. He was very polite, very charming, asking if I had seen what happened tonight. He said you had fallen down the stairs and hit your head, and he was worried that witnesses might have gotten the wrong impression about the incident." "What did you tell him?" "I didn't open the door. 40 years in this neighborhood has taught me to trust my instincts about people, and something about his tone made my skin crawl. But Sarah, I'm worried he knows I saw what really happened." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to be careful. Derek can be dangerous when he feels threatened. Don't you worry about me, honey. I've been taking care of myself since before that boy was born. What I'm worried about is you and that baby. Do you have somewhere safe to go? I'm with my godfather right now. He's a doctor here at the hospital, and he's going to help me figure out what to do next." "Good, that's good, Sarah. I want you to know that I've already sent the video to my daughter in California. I told her to keep it safe in case something happens to me. And I've made copies on my computer. Whatever that man thinks he can do to intimidate me, the evidence isn't going anywhere." The practicality of Mrs. Thompson's preparations impressed Sarah. While she had been paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, her elderly neighbor had been taking concrete steps to protect both of them. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been watching tonight. I've been watching for months, honey. I've seen the ambulances that come to your building, seen you leaving with bruises you try to cover with makeup. I should have said something sooner, but I wasn't sure how to approach you without making things worse. The admission hit Sarah like a revelation. She had thought she was hiding the abuse successfully, that her careful concealer and strategic clothing choices were maintaining the illusion of a perfect marriage. The idea that her neighbor had been witnessing and worrying about her situation for months was both embarrassing and oddly comforting. You couldn't have known how to help, Sarah said. I didn't even know how to help myself. Well, you're getting help now, and that's what matters. You call me if you need anything. Anything at all. And Sarah, you're stronger than you think you are. Surviving what you've been through takes tremendous courage. After they hung up, Sarah lay in the quiet hospital room thinking about courage. She had never thought of herself as courageous. Courage, in her mind, belonged to people who fought wars or rescued strangers from burning buildings or stood up to bullies in schoolyards. But maybe Mrs. Thompson was right. Maybe surviving each day in an abusive marriage, protecting her unborn child, finally finding the strength to tell the truth. Maybe those things required courage too. Down the hall, she could hear voices rising in what sounded like a heated conversation. Derek's tone was becoming more aggressive, and Marcus's responses were growing shorter and more clipped. The consultation wasn't going well for Derek, and Sarah knew from experience that he would take his frustration out on the nearest available target. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Rebecca Morrison, attorney. Dr. Sterling asked me to contact you. I specialize in family law and domestic violence cases. I'm coming to the hospital now to discuss your options. You're not alone in this. The message was like a lifeline thrown to someone who had been drowning without realizing it. Marcus wasn't just offering emotional support. He was mobilizing practical resources to help her navigate the legal and logistical challenges ahead. 20 minutes later, the voices in the hallway had died down, and Marcus returned to Sarah's cubicle with a grim expression. How did it go? Sarah asked. Derek is angry, Marcus said simply. He's demanding to take you home tonight, and when I refused, he threatened to file complaints against me and the hospital for interfering with his parental rights. What does that mean? It means he's scared and desperate, which makes him more dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. When people like Derek feel their control slipping, they tend to overreach and expose themselves. Sewan, Marcus pulled up the rolling stool and sat down, his expression serious but not unkind. Sarah, I need to tell you something about Derek's business dealings that you might not know. I've been making some calls while he was here, and I've learned some disturbing information. Sarah's stomach clenched with a familiar anxiety. What kind of information? The credit card charges you questioned tonight. They weren't for business expenses or innocent purchases. Derek has been using your joint accounts to fund what appears to be an extramarital relationship. The jewelry and flowers and restaurant charges were for another woman. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow, not because she was surprised by Derek's infidelity, but because it confirmed her worst fears about her own judgment. She had suspected something for months, but had allowed Derek to convince her that her suspicions were paranoid delusions caused by pregnancy hormones and anxiety disorders. How do you know? She asked quietly. My private investigator is very thorough. The woman's name is Jessica Walsh. She's 26 years old, works as a marketing coordinator for one of Derek's development projects. The relationship has been going on for at least 8 months. 8 months? Sarah calculated backward and realized Derek had been cheating on her since before she got pregnant, possibly since before they started trying to have a baby. The timeline made her feel sick, not just because of the betrayal, but because it meant Derek had been planning his deception while they were making major life decisions together. There's more, Marcus continued gently. Derek has been forging your signature on loan documents and using your name to secure financing for development projects that don't exist. You're potentially liable for millions of dollars in fraudulent debt. Sarah felt the room spinning around her as the full scope of Derek's deception became clear. He hadn't just been abusing her physically and emotionally. He had been systematically destroying her financial security and legal standing. The trust fund her parents had left her, the money Marcus had been carefully managing for her future, had been feeding Derek's business ventures and personal indulgences. Can he do that legally? She asked. Forging your signature is fraud, and using your credit and assets without your knowledge is theft. None of it is legal, but proving it and recovering the money will take time and resources. Resources I don't have if Derek has stolen everything. Marcus smiled grimly. Resources you don't have. Resources I do have. Sarah, I'm not just your godfather. I'm also the person your parents entrusted with ensuring your security and well-being. That includes protecting you from people who would take advantage of you, even if one of those people happens to be your husband. The reminder of her parents' trust brought tears to Sarah's eyes. They had died when she was 16, just young enough to need a guardian, but old enough to understand the responsibility Marcus had accepted by taking her in. He had never made her feel like a burden or an obligation, had never treated her like anything other than the daughter he had never had. What happens now? She asked. Now we document everything. Rebecca Morrison is on her way here with a legal team that specializes in complex domestic abuse cases involving financial crimes. We're going to protect you and the baby, secure the evidence of Derek's fraud, and make sure he can't hurt you again. Derek won't just accept that. He'll fight back. Of course he will. Men like Derek don't give up control easily. But Sarah, you need to understand something important. You're not fighting him alone anymore. You have resources now, and you have people who care about you and want to help. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang with Derek's number displayed on the screen. She looked at Marcus questioningly. Answer it, he said, but put it on speaker so I can hear what he says. Sarah accepted the call, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed the speaker button. Sarah, honey, I'm outside in the parking lot. Dr. Sterling has some crazy idea that you need to stay here overnight, but I think you'd be more comfortable at home. Can you ask them to discharge you so we can go home together? The manipulation in Derek's voice was so subtle and practiced that Sarah might have missed it if Marcus hadn't been there to witness it. Derek was positioning himself as the reasonable husband whose wishes were being thwarted by an overzealous doctor, making it seem like Sarah's continued hospitalization was against her own interests. I think Dr. Sterling is right, Sarah said carefully. The head injury could be serious, and I want to make sure the baby is okay. Sweetheart, you know I always want what's best for you and our daughter. But hospitals are stressful places, and stress isn't good for the baby. Our own bed, our own space, familiar surroundings. Doesn't that sound better than a noisy hospital room? Marcus nodded encouragingly, and Sarah found the courage to say what she had been thinking. Actually, I feel safer here. I want to stay. There was a long pause before Derek responded, and when he did, his voice carried an edge of steel that Sarah recognized as dangerous. Safer, Sarah. What exactly do you think you need to be safe from? I just meant medically safer, in case there are complications from the head injury. Right. Of course. Well, if that's what you really want, I suppose I can't argue with medical advice. I'll see you first thing in the morning, and we can discuss this further then. The line went dead, and Sarah realized she was holding her breath. He knows, Marcus said quietly. He knows you're pulling away from him, and he's going to escalate. We need to move quickly. As if summoned by Marcus's words, a woman's voice called from the hallway. Dr. Sterling, I'm Rebecca Morrison. I'm here about the Mitchell case. The cavalry was arriving, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt like she might actually survive it. Rebecca Morrison swept into Sarah's hospital room like a force of nature contained in a perfectly tailored navy suit. At 45, she possessed the kind of commanding presence that made people pay attention before she even opened her mouth. Her silver hair was pulled back in a precise chignon, and her pale gray eyes held the calculating intensity of someone who had built a career destroying powerful men who hurt vulnerable women. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, extending a manicured hand. I'm Rebecca Morrison. Dr. Sterling has briefed me on your situation, and I want you to know that you're safe now. We're going to make sure Derek can never hurt you again. Sarah shook the offered hand, surprised by the firmness of Rebecca's grip and the confidence in her voice. She had expected a lawyer to be more cautious, more qualified in their promises. But Rebecca spoke with the certainty of someone who had won battles that others considered unwinnable. Dr. Sterling says you specialize in cases like mine? Sarah said hesitantly. I specialize in taking down abusive millionaire ex-husbands who think their money makes them untouchable. Rebecca replied bluntly. Derek Mitchell is exactly the kind of man I've been destroying in courtrooms for 20 years. Marcus pulled up additional chairs, transforming Sarah's small hospital cubicle into an impromptu war room. Rebecca, what do we need to know about the legal landscape here? Rebecca opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. I've already run preliminary background checks on Derek's business dealings and financial situation. The picture that's emerging is significantly worse than simple domestic abuse. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Worse how? Derek's real estate business is on the verge of collapse. He's been using fraudulent loan applications and forged documents to secure financing for development projects that exist only on paper. The money has been funneled into personal accounts and high-risk investments that have failed spectacularly. What does that mean for Sarah? Marcus asked. It means Derek isn't just an abusive husband. He's a desperate criminal who's facing potential federal charges for fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Men in his position become extremely dangerous when they realize their entire life is about to collapse. Sarah listened to this assessment with growing horror, understanding that she had been living with someone far more dangerous than she had realized. Derek's violence had been frightening enough when she thought it was about control and anger. The idea that it might be connected to criminal desperation made her feel physically sick. "How much money are we talking about?" she asked quietly. Rebecca scrolled through her tablet, her expression grim. Conservative estimate, Derek has stolen or misappropriated close to $15 million over the past 3 years. That includes Sarah's trust fund, fraudulent loans secured using her credit and assets, and money stolen from business partners and investors. 15 million? Sarah repeated numbly. I had no idea. Abusive spouses typically keep their victims isolated from financial information, Rebecca explained. Derek has been very careful to maintain the illusion that his business is successful while systematically looting every account he could access. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. What kind of legal exposure does Sarah face? Significant? If we don't act quickly, Derek has forged Sarah's signature on dozens of documents, making her appear complicit in his fraud. If federal investigators aren't made aware of the domestic abuse and forgery, Sarah could be charged as a co-conspirator. The room fell silent as the full scope of Derek's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just been stealing money, he had been positioning Sarah to take the fall if his crimes were discovered. The pattern of psychological abuse that had convinced her to doubt her own perceptions had also isolated her from the financial knowledge that might have protected her. What do we do? Sarah asked. We go on the offensive, Rebecca replied. Tomorrow morning, we file for an emergency restraining order based on tonight's assault and Mrs. Thompson's video evidence. Simultaneously, we contact federal investigators and provide them with documentation of Derek's fraud, making it clear that Sarah is a victim rather than a participant. Will that be enough to protect her legally? It's a start, but Sarah, you need to understand that this process is going to get much worse before it gets better. Derek will fight back viciously when he realizes what's happening. He'll try to discredit you, intimidate witnesses, and use every resource at his disposal to maintain control. Sarah thought about Derek's threats regarding custody of their unborn daughter, his promises to destroy her reputation and prove her mental instability. He said no court would give custody to someone with my psychiatric history. He's been recording my therapy sessions illegally. Rebecca's eyes hardened. Recording private therapy sessions without consent is a felony in New York. That's another federal charge we can add to his growing list. And Sarah, courts don't award custody to men facing racketeering charges, regardless of the mother's mental health history. Marcus pulled out his own phone and began scrolling through contacts. I'm calling Tom Bradley, my private investigator. If Derek has been as sloppy with his criminal activities as Rebecca suggests, Tom will find the evidence we need to bury him. Good, Rebecca agreed. The more evidence we can gather quickly, the stronger our position becomes. But we also need to focus on immediate safety concerns. Derek knows something has changed tonight, and he's going to try to reassert control. As if summoned by her words, Sarah's phone began ringing with Derek's contact information displayed on the screen. All three of them stared at the device as it buzzed insistently. Answer it, Rebecca said. Put it on speaker so we can document his behavior. Sarah accepted the call with trembling fingers, pressing the speaker button as Derek's voice filled the small space. Sarah, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, and I realize I may have been too harsh with you. Pregnancy is stressful, and I know you've been struggling with anxiety. Maybe we should look into getting you some additional help. The manipulation was so subtle and expertly crafted that Sarah felt herself responding to it emotionally, even as her rational mind recognized the technique. Derek was repositioning tonight's assault as a mental health crisis, requiring his intervention and care. "I'm feeling better now," Sarah said carefully. "Dr. Sterling thinks I should stay here tonight for observation." "Of course he does. But sweetheart, you know hospitals aren't the best place for someone dealing with emotional issues. All the noise and unfamiliar faces in medical procedures, that kind of environment can make anxiety much worse." Rebecca held up her tablet, showing Sarah a message she had typed. "Ask him about the credit card charges." Sarah took a deep breath. "Derek, I've been thinking about those credit card charges I asked you about earlier. Can you help me understand what they were for?" There was a pause before Derek responded, and when he did, his voice carried a hint of irritation. "Sarah, we've already discussed this. Those charges were legitimate business expenses. The fact that you can't remember our conversation about them is exactly why I'm concerned about your mental state." "But I do remember our conversation," Sarah said, finding strength in Marcus and Rebecca's presence. "I remember asking about jewelry I never received and flowers that never came to our apartment. I remember you getting angry when I asked for explanations." "Honey, you're confused. The pregnancy and the head injury tonight have obviously affected your memory. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that we need to address with professional help." Rebecca nodded approvingly and held up another message. "Tell him you're going to contact the credit card company directly." "I think I should call the credit card company tomorrow and get detailed statements for the past few months," Sarah said. "That way I can see exactly what the charges were for and put my mind at ease." The silence on Derek's end stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all pretense of patience and concern. "Sarah, I forbid you to contact the credit card company. Those are private business matters that don't concern you, and interfering with my financial affairs would be completely inappropriate for a wife." "Forbid," Sarah repeated, surprised by her own boldness. "Derek, they're joint accounts. I have every right to review the statements." "You have rights that I give you," Derek snapped, his mask finally slipping completely. "You live in a home I provide. You eat food I buy. You wear clothes I pay for. You don't have independent rights to anything, including our financial accounts." Rebecca was typing furiously on her tablet, documenting Derek's words as he revealed his true attitude toward his wife's autonomy. Marcus had pulled out his own phone and appeared to be recording the conversation. "That doesn't sound right," Sarah said, emboldened by her support team. "I thought married couples shared financial responsibilities in decision-making." "Married couples where the wife contributes something meaningful to the partnership? Yes, but you don't work, you don't earn income, and you don't have any business skills that qualify you to make financial decisions. Your job is to support me and raise our children, not to interfere with matters you don't understand." The contempt in Derek's voice was so naked and vicious that Sarah felt physically recoiled. This was how he really saw her, as a dependent who had no right to question or challenge his authority. "I think I understand now," Sarah said quietly. "Good. I'm glad we've cleared that up. Now, I want you to tell Dr. Sterling that you've changed your mind about staying overnight. I'll be there in 10 minutes to take you home. And tomorrow we're going to find you a psychiatrist who can help you work through these paranoid episodes." "Actually," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, "I've decided I want to stay here tonight, and tomorrow I'm going to call a lawyer." The silence that followed was so complete that Sarah could hear Derek's breathing through the phone, quick and shallow with barely controlled rage. "You're going to call a lawyer," he repeated slowly. "Yes, I think I need someone to help me understand my rights regarding our finances and other marital matters." "Sarah," Derek said, his voice dropping to the dangerous whisper Sarah had learned to fear most. "If you call a lawyer, if you try to interfere with our marriage or my business, you will regret it for the rest of your life. I will destroy you so completely that you'll wish you had never been born." Rebecca leaned forward and spoke directly into the phone. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Morrison, Mrs. Mitchell's attorney. I want you to know that I'm recording this conversation, and your threats against my client constitute criminal intimidation." The line went dead immediately, but not before they all heard Derek's stream of profanity and violent threats. "Well," Rebecca said calmly, "that went better than I expected. He just provided us with recorded evidence of financial abuse, domestic intimidation, and criminal threats. We'll have that restraining order by tomorrow afternoon. Sarah stared at her phone, unable to believe that the conversation had actually happened. For months, she had been terrified of confronting Derek about anything meaningful. Tonight, with the right support, she had not only challenged him, but had forced him to reveal his true nature to witnesses who could help her. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus reached over and took her hand. "Now we make sure you and the baby are safe while Rebecca dismantles Derek's entire life piece by piece." "It won't be easy," Rebecca warned. "Derek will escalate before he accepts defeat. But Sarah, you need to know that you're not fighting him alone anymore. You have resources now, and you have people who care about you." As if to underscore Rebecca's warning, security guards appeared at the entrance to Sarah's cubicle. "Dr. Sterling, there's a man in the parking lot making threats about forcing his way into the hospital. Should we call the police?" Marcus and Rebecca exchanged looks. "Yes," Marcus said. "Call the police and increase security around the maternity ward. Derek Mitchell is not to be allowed anywhere near this hospital." Sarah closed her eyes and felt the baby moving inside her, as if sensing the tension and change in their circumstances. Whatever happened next, she was no longer facing it alone. The billionaire Godfather she had lost touch with had returned with resources and connections Derek couldn't match. The nightmare was far from over, but for the first time in months, Sarah believed she might actually survive it. The war room atmosphere in Sarah's hospital cubicle intensified as the night progressed. What had started as a medical emergency had transformed into a complex legal and financial operation, with Marcus coordinating resources from his extensive network, while Rebecca built an airtight case against Derek. Sarah watched in amazement as phone calls were made, documents were requested, and a comprehensive strategy took shape around her hospital bed. "Tom Bradley is on his way," Marcus announced, closing his phone after a brief conversation. "He's bringing copies of Derek's business records and bank statements. Apparently, Derek has been even sloppier with his fraud than we initially thought." Rebecca looked up from her tablet, where she had been drafting legal documents with practiced efficiency. "Good. The more evidence we can compile tonight, the stronger our position tomorrow. Sarah, I need you to think carefully about Derek's daily routines. Where does he keep important documents? What passwords might he use for business accounts? Any information could be crucial." Sarah tried to focus on practical details, but her mind kept drifting to the larger implications of what was happening. 6 hours ago, she had been a trapped wife in an abusive marriage, isolated and convinced that her situation was hopeless. Now she was surrounded by powerful allies who were treating Derek's crimes as solvable problems rather than insurmountable obstacles. "He has a home office with a safe behind his desk," she said slowly. "The combination is my birthday, which always seemed romantic until tonight. Now I wonder if he used it because he knew I would never suspect him of hiding things from me on my own birthday." "Classic manipulation," Rebecca agreed. "Abusers often use sentimental gestures to mask practical deceptions. What else can you tell us about his business practices?" "He gets a lot of phone calls that he takes in private, always steps out of the room or goes into his office and closes the door, and he travels frequently for what he calls client meetings. But he never wants me to know the details." Marcus frowned. "How frequently?" "2 or 3 times a month, usually overnight trips to other cities. Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. He says real estate development requires a lot of face-to-face meetings with investors and city planners." "Or meetings with Jessica Walsh," Rebecca said grimly, "the woman he's been having an affair with. Tom's preliminary investigation shows she's traveled with Derek on several of these business trips, with expenses charged to company accounts that don't exist." Sarah felt a familiar wave of humiliation wash over her, but this time it was accompanied by something new. Anger. For months, Derek had been making her feel paranoid and suspicious for questioning his behavior, while simultaneously using their joint accounts to fund romantic getaways with another woman. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "At least 8 months, possibly longer. Jessica Walsh was hired as a marketing coordinator for Mitchell Development last year, but there's no evidence she's done any actual marketing work. Her salary appears to be payment for personal services." The clinical way Rebecca described Derek's infidelity somehow made it easier for Sarah to process. This wasn't about love or attraction or even dissatisfaction with their marriage. It was another form of theft, another way Derek had been stealing from their relationship while making Sarah feel responsible for his distance and anger. A knock on the cubicle's frame announced the arrival of Tom Bradley, Marcus's private investigator. At 58, Tom had the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades digging up secrets that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He carried a briefcase and wore the expression of someone with very bad news to deliver. "Dr. Sterling, Miss Morrison," he said, nodding to each of them before turning to Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry we have to meet under these circumstances, but I think I can help you understand exactly what your husband has been doing behind your back." Tom opened his briefcase and spread documents across Sarah's hospital bed, like a detective laying out evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, loan applications, business contracts, and photographs created a paper trail of Derek's criminal activities. "Let's start with the basics," Tom said. "Mitchell Development, Derek's real estate company, is technically bankrupt, has been for 18 months. The apparent success and ongoing projects are elaborate fiction designed to keep investors writing checks." Sarah stared at the financial documents, trying to reconcile the numbers with Derek's constant talk about successful deals and expanding business opportunities. "But he just bought a new Mercedes. He talks about projects worth millions of dollars." "The Mercedes is leased using fraudulent loan applications that list you as a cosigner," Tom explained. "The projects he discusses exist only in promotional materials designed to attract new investors." Derek has been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay returns to previous investors while skimming significant amounts for personal expenses. Marcus leaned forward, studying the documents with the focused attention he brought to complex medical cases. "How much money are we talking about?" "Derek has stolen approximately $23 million over the past 3 years," Tom said. "That includes Sarah's trust fund, fraudulent loans, and investor money. Most of it has been spent on maintaining his lifestyle, funding his affair, and making high-risk investments that failed." $23 million. Sarah tried to comprehend the scope of Derek's theft and deception, but the number was so large it felt abstract. She thought about all the times Derek had criticized her spending on groceries or clothing, all the lectures about being responsible with money while he was stealing millions. "What does this mean for the investors who trusted him?" she asked. "It means Derek will be facing federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." Rebecca said, "The FBI has been investigating Mitchell Development for 6 months. They were planning to move forward with arrests next week." "Next week," Sarah repeated, "which explains Derek's escalating behavior," Marcus observed. "He knows his world is about to collapse, and he's been taking his desperation out on you." Tom pulled out a series of photographs that made Sarah's blood run cold. Images of Derek and Jessica Walsh together at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and vacation destinations. The photos spanned several months and showed a level of intimacy that went far beyond a professional relationship. "Jessica Walsh has been fully cooperative with federal investigators," Tom continued. "She's provided detailed information about Derek's business practices and personal behavior in exchange for immunity from prosecution." "She's turned against him?" Sarah asked. "Derek made the same mistake with Jessica that he made with you." Rebecca explained. "He underestimated her intelligence and assumed his charm and money would keep her loyal indefinitely. When federal agents approached her with evidence of the fraud, she realized Derek had been lying to her about his financial situation and business prospects." Sarah felt an unexpected moment of sympathy for Jessica Walsh. Like her, the younger woman had been manipulated and deceived by Derek's carefully constructed facade. The difference was that Jessica had been smart enough to save herself when she learned the truth. "What else did Jessica tell the FBI?" Marcus asked. Tom consulted his notes. "Derek has been increasingly paranoid about Sarah discovering his crimes. He's mentioned several times that he would need to handle the Sarah problem if she became too curious about his business affairs." Jessica interpreted that as threats of violence. The phrase "handle the Sarah problem" sent chills down Sarah's spine. She wasn't just Derek's wife. She was a potential witness who could expose his crimes. Tonight's assault hadn't been about credit card statements or pregnancy hormones. It had been Derek's first attempt to silence her permanently. "There's more," Tom continued. Derek has been researching ways to have Sarah declared mentally incompetent. He's consulted with lawyers about committing her to psychiatric facilities and gaining control of her remaining assets through conservatorship proceedings. That's why he's been so focused on my therapy sessions and mental health issues, Sarah realized. He wasn't trying to help me get better. He was documenting evidence to use against me. Exactly, Rebecca confirmed. The illegal recordings of your therapy sessions were part of a larger plan to discredit you if you ever tried to expose his crimes or leave the marriage. Sarah thought about all the times Derek had suggested she was overreacting or imagining problems. All the subtle ways he had undermined her confidence in her own perceptions. It hadn't been gaslighting for its own sake. It had been preparation for a legal strategy to declare her incompetent. The good news, Tom said, is that we now have extensive documentation of Derek's criminal activities and plans to harm you. Between Mrs. Thompson's video evidence, Jessica Walsh's testimony, and the federal investigation, Derek's credibility is completely destroyed. What happens when he realizes how much evidence we have? Sarah asked. He'll probably try to flee the country, Rebecca said matter-of-factly. Men like Derek often have offshore accounts and contingency plans for exactly this scenario. But the FBI has been monitoring his financial activities and travel for months. He won't get far. Marcus pulled out his phone as it began ringing, checking the caller ID before answering. Dr. Sterling. Yes, I understand. How many agents? We'll be ready. He hung up and turned to the group. That was hospital security. FBI agents are in the lobby asking to speak with Sarah about Derek Mitchell. It appears the federal investigation is accelerating. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as the reality of her situation hit her fully. She wasn't just leaving an abusive marriage. She was becoming a key witness in a major federal criminal case. Derek wasn't just her dangerous ex-husband. He was a desperate criminal facing decades in prison. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. That's completely normal, Rebecca said, her voice gentling. But Sarah, you need to understand that everything has changed tonight. 6 hours ago, you were isolated and helpless. Now you have evidence, allies, and federal protection. Derek's power was always an illusion built on deception and fear. Now that the illusion is shattered, he's just another criminal facing justice. A knock on the cubicle frame announced the arrival of 2 FBI agents, a woman and a man in conservative suits carrying credentials and serious expressions. Mrs. Mitchell, the female agent said, I'm Agent Jennifer Walsh with the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. We need to speak with you about your husband's business activities and your own safety. Sarah looked around at her unlikely support team, her billionaire godfather, her fierce attorney, the private investigator, and now federal agents. For the first time since Derek had pushed her down those stairs, she felt like the balance of power had shifted in her favor. What do you need to know? She asked. Agent Walsh smiled grimly. Everything, and Mrs. Mitchell. After tonight, Derek Mitchell will never hurt you again. That's a promise. The next morning arrived with the antiseptic brightness of hospital fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of the day shift beginning their rounds. Sarah had dozed fitfully between FBI interviews and medical checkups, her sleep punctuated by nightmares of Derek's threats and the strange relief of knowing she would never have to face them alone again. Agent Jennifer Walsh had been thorough and surprisingly gentle in her questioning, treating Sarah as a victim and witness rather than a potential co-conspirator. The FBI had been building their case against Derek for months, but Sarah's testimony and Mrs. Thompson's video evidence provided the final pieces they needed to move forward with arrests. We'll be taking Derek into custody this morning, Agent Walsh had explained during their 3 a.m. conversation. But Mrs. Mitchell, you need to understand that desperate men do desperate things. We're going to provide protection for you and Mrs. Thompson until Derek is safely in federal custody. Now, as morning sun filtered through the hospital room windows, Sarah felt a strange combination of terror and anticipation. Today would mark either the end of her nightmare or Derek's most dangerous escalation. Marcus entered the room carrying coffee and wearing the exhausted expression of someone who had spent the night coordinating a complex operation. How are you feeling? Sweetheart, like I'm about to wake up from a dream and find out none of this really happened, Sarah admitted. It doesn't seem possible that everything could change so quickly. Sometimes the most dramatic changes happen all at once, Marcus replied. You've been building toward this moment for months, even if you didn't realize it. All we did was provide the resources to make your courage effective. Rebecca Morrison arrived shortly after. Looking impeccable despite having worked through the night, she carried a briefcase full of legal documents and the satisfied expression of someone who had built an unbeatable case. Good morning. Sarah, how are you and the baby doing? Better? The bleeding stopped, and the baby's been moving normally. Doctor, Patel says I can be discharged this afternoon if there are no complications. Excellent, because we have a busy day ahead of us. The emergency restraining order has been approved, and federal warrants have been issued for Derek's arrest. We're also filing civil suits to recover your stolen assets and protect you from liability for Derek's fraudulent debts. Sarah tried to process the legal machinery that had been set in motion on her behalf. Yesterday she had been trapped and helpless. Today she had teams of lawyers and federal agents working to protect her interests. The transformation felt too dramatic to be real. What happens when Derek realizes what's happening? She asked. We're about to find out, Marcus said, checking his phone. Tom Bradley is conducting surveillance on Derek's movements this morning. He should be arriving at his office right about now. As if summoned by Marcus's words, Sarah's phone began ringing with Derek's contact information displayed on the screen. All three of them stared at the device as it buzzed insistently. Should I answer it? Sarah asked. Yes, Rebecca said. But put it on speaker so we can document whatever he says. FBI agents are recording Derek's calls now, but it's good to have multiple records. Sarah accepted the call with trembling fingers, pressing the speaker button as Derek's voice filled the room. He sounded different this morning, manic and desperate rather than controlled and threatening. Sarah, honey, thank God you answered. Listen to me very carefully. We need to leave town today. Right now. I'll pick you up from the hospital and we can drive to Canada. I have business opportunities there that require immediate attention. The suggestion was so transparently desperate that Sarah felt almost sorry for Derek. He obviously knew that his world was collapsing and was trying to flee the country with his pregnant wife as either a cover story or a human shield. Derek, I can't travel right now. The doctor wants to monitor me for complications from the head injury. Forget the doctor, Derek snapped, his mask slipping immediately. This is more important than your minor injury. Pack whatever you can carry and meet me in the hospital parking lot in 20 minutes. I'm not going anywhere with you, Sarah said, finding strength in her support team's presence. Derek, I know about Jessica Walsh. I know about the stolen money. I know about everything. The silence on Derek's end stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the dangerous edge she had learned to fear most. Who told you about Jessica? It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that I know you've been lying to me about everything. Your business, your finances, your feelings about our marriage. Sarah, you don't understand the complexity of my business dealings. What looks like deception to you is actually sophisticated financial planning that protects our family's interests. Rebecca held up her tablet with a message. Ask him about the federal investigation. Derek, the FBI knows about your financial planning. They have evidence of fraud and money laundering. Jessica has been cooperating with federal investigators for months. Another long silence, followed by the sound of Derek's breathing becoming rapid and shallow. That bitch, he whispered. That stupid little bitch thinks she can destroy me. But she doesn't know who she's dealing with. Derek, the evidence isn't just from Jessica. The FBI has bank records, forged documents, testimony from multiple witnesses. It's over. It's not over, Derek shouted, his voice echoing through the hospital room. Nothing is over until I say it's over, Sarah. You belong to me. That baby belongs to me. No one gets to take my family away from me. Marcus moved closer to the phone, his surgeon's calm providing a stark contrast to Derek's hysteria. Derek, this is Dr. Sterling. I think it would be best if you turned yourself in to federal authorities voluntarily. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and cooperation might lead to more lenient sentencing. Dr. Sterling, Derek said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You rich bastards think you can interfere with my marriage and steal my wife just because you have more money than I do? But money won't protect you when I decide to handle this personally. Is that a threat, Mr. Mitchell? It's a promise. You've made an enemy of the wrong man, and you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. Rebecca leaned forward to speak into the phone. Mr. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Morrison again. I want you to know that FBI agents are currently serving search warrants at your office and apartment. They have evidence of fraud, domestic violence, and now criminal threats against witnesses. Every word you've spoken this morning is being recorded and will be used against you in court. You lawyers are all the same, Derek snarled. You think legal technicalities can protect you from real consequences? But I've got news for all of you. Some problems can't be solved in courtrooms. The line went dead, leaving an ominous silence in the hospital room. Well, Rebecca said calmly, that was illuminating. Derek just provided us with recorded evidence of flight risk, witness intimidation, and specific threats against multiple people. The federal judge will have no choice but to deny bail when he's arrested. Sarah stared at her phone, unable to believe that the man she had married could transform so completely when his facade was stripped away. The charming businessman who had swept her off her feet had revealed himself to be a desperate criminal, willing to threaten anyone who challenged his control. What happens now? She asked. Marcus pulled out his phone as it began buzzing with an incoming call. This should be Tom Bradley with an update on Derek's location. He answered the call and put it on speaker. Tom, what's the situation? Derek just left his office in a panic. Tom's voice reported. FBI agents were waiting for him, but he saw them before they saw him and managed to slip out the back entrance. He's driving erratically and appears to be heading toward the hospital. How long until he gets here? Marcus asked. 10 minutes, maybe 15. Dr. Sterling, this guy is completely unhinged. I've been watching him for 2 days, and his behavior this morning suggests someone who's lost all rational thinking. Rebecca was already gathering her documents and moving toward the door. We need to get Sarah out of here immediately. If Derek is desperate enough to confront her in a hospital with FBI agents looking for him, he's dangerous enough to hurt innocent people. Marcus was already pressing the call button for nurses while simultaneously dialing hospital security. We're going to move you to a secure location until Derek is in custody, he told Sarah. Don't worry about packing anything. We just need to get you somewhere safe. As if to underscore the urgency of the situation, Sarah's phone rang again with Derek's number. This time, when she answered, she could hear traffic noise and the sound of aggressive driving. Sarah, I'm coming to get you, Derek said, his voice manic with desperation. We're leaving this city together, and we're never coming back. Anyone who tries to stop me is going to regret it. Derek, please don't come to the hospital. There are innocent people here who could get hurt. I don't care about innocent people, he shouted. I care about my wife and my child, and I'm not letting anyone take them away from me. Agent Walsh's voice came from the hospital corridor as she approached with several other federal agents. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to move you now. Derek Mitchell is armed and driving toward this location. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice water. Armed. He purchased a handgun 3 days ago using falsified identification, Agent Walsh explained as she and Marcus helped Sarah into a wheelchair. We have to assume he's extremely dangerous and willing to hurt anyone who gets in his way. As they moved through the hospital corridors toward a service elevator, Sarah could hear the distant sound of sirens and the crackle of radio communications. The quiet medical facility was transforming into something resembling a crime scene, with federal agents coordinating security while nurses evacuated patients from areas Derek might try to access. Where are we going? Sarah asked as the service elevator carried them toward the hospital's basement levels. Secure conference room in the administrative wing, Agent Walsh replied. Underground, no windows, multiple exit routes. Derek won't be able to find you there. As the elevator doors opened into the hospital's basement corridors, Sarah realized that her confrontation with Derek was about to reach its climax. Everything that had been building for months, the abuse, the lies, the financial crimes, the federal investigation, was converging into a single moment that would determine whether she and her unborn daughter would be free or forever trapped by Derek's desperation. The sound of squealing tires in the hospital parking lot above them suggested that Derek had arrived, and the final battle for Sarah's freedom was about to begin. The underground conference room in Manhattan General's administrative wing felt like a bunker, its windowless walls and multiple security monitors creating an atmosphere of siege warfare rather than medical care. Sarah sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, watching federal agents coordinate Derek's capture on screens that showed various angles of the hospital complex. Target vehicle located in parking structure, level 2. Agent Walsh's radio crackled. Subject appears to be on foot, moving toward main hospital entrance. Marcus paced the small space with the controlled energy of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. How many people are in the hospital right now? Skeleton crew for Sunday morning, Agent Walsh replied. About 60 staff members and maybe 40 patients. We've evacuated the emergency department and locked down the maternity ward as precautionary measures. Rebecca Morrison continued working on her tablet, building legal documentation even as Derek's final desperate gambit played out above them. Sarah, I need you to know that regardless of what happens in the next hour, Derek can never hurt you again. The evidence we've compiled guarantees that he'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison. Sarah watched the security monitors with morbid fascination, seeing Derek's small figure moving through the hospital corridors with the jerky movements of someone operating on pure adrenaline in desperation. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by his circumstances rather than enlarged by his usual arrogance. He looks lost, she observed quietly. That's because his entire world has collapsed in the past 12 hours, Marcus replied. Men like Derek derive their sense of power from control and deception. When both of those are stripped away, they become dangerous but also pathetic. One of the monitors showed Derek approaching the nurses' station in the emergency department, where a single nurse remained to direct him away from patient areas. Even from the grainy security footage, Sarah could see the wild desperation in Derek's gestures as he demanded information about her location. He's asking about Sarah, Agent Walsh reported, listening to communications from agents positioned throughout the hospital. The nurse is following protocol and refusing to provide patient information. On screen, Derek's conversation with the nurse became increasingly animated. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but his body language suggested escalating aggression and frustration. The nurse remained calm and professional, clearly trained for difficult situations, but probably not for dealing with armed fugitives. Should we intervene? Marcus asked. Not yet, Agent Walsh replied. We have agents positioned at every exit and stairwell. Derek can't leave the building, and he can't access patient areas without triggering immediate response. Sometimes it's better to let desperate people exhaust themselves through futile searching. Sarah's phone rang again, Derek's number appearing on the screen like a summons from a nightmare she couldn't fully escape. Agent Walsh nodded for her to answer. Derek, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the conference room speakers. Where are you? Derek demanded, his voice tight with panic and rage. I know you're here somewhere. The nurse won't tell me anything, but I'm going to find you. Derek, please just leave. You're only making things worse for yourself. Worse? Derek laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. Sarah, my business is destroyed, my money is gone, and federal agents are hunting me like an animal. How exactly could things get worse? You could hurt innocent people. You could make it impossible for any judge to show you mercy during sentencing. I don't want mercy, Derek snarled. I want my wife and my child, and I want the rich bastards who stole them from me to pay for their interference. On the security monitors, Sarah could see Derek moving through hospital corridors with increasing agitation, checking rooms and confronting staff members who couldn't provide the information he demanded. His movements were becoming more erratic, more dangerous. Derek, I'm not your property, Sarah said, finding strength in the truth she had been afraid to speak for months. I never was your property. I was your wife, and you destroyed that relationship through lies and violence and theft. You belonged to me the moment you said I do, Derek replied. That baby belongs to me. Everything in your life belongs to me, and no one gets to take what's mine. Rebecca leaned toward the phone. Mr. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Morrison. I want you to understand that Sarah has filed for divorce and obtained an emergency restraining order. Legally, you have no rights regarding her or the baby. Any attempt to contact or approach her constitutes a felony. Legally, Derek repeated mockingly. You lawyers think everything comes down to legal documents and court orders, but some things are more fundamental than law. Agent Walsh was receiving continuous updates through her earpiece, coordinating the tactical response while monitoring Derek's psychological state. He's becoming more unstable, she observed. Subjects in his position sometimes attempt suicide by cop or murder-suicide scenarios when they realize escape is impossible. The clinical assessment sent chills through Sarah's body. She had lived with Derek's escalating violence for months, but the idea that he might try to take her and their unborn daughter with him into death had never occurred to her. "Derek," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "Think about the baby. Think about your daughter. She deserves a chance at life, regardless of what happens between us." "My daughter deserves a father," Derek replied. "She deserves to grow up in a family, not as the bastard child of a woman who destroyed her parents' marriage with paranoid accusations." The distortion of reality in Derek's words was so complete that Sarah finally understood the full scope of his psychological dysfunction. In his mind, he was the victim of Sarah's betrayal rather than the architect of his own destruction. The abuse, the theft, the lies, all of it had been reframed in his narrative as justified responses to her inadequacies. "Derek, I never destroyed our marriage. You destroyed it when you started hitting me. You destroyed it when you started stealing money. You destroyed it when you started sleeping with Jessica Walsh." "Jessica was a mistake," Derek admitted. "A distraction I used to cope with the stress of your constant questioning and suspicion. If you had been a supportive wife instead of a paranoid interrogator, I never would have needed outside comfort." Even in his desperate circumstances, Derek was still attempting to make Sarah responsible for his choices. The pattern was so ingrained that he couldn't abandon it even when facing federal prosecution and life imprisonment. On the security monitors, Derek had reached the elevator banks and was pressing buttons frantically, trying to access floors that had been locked down by hospital security. His movements were becoming more agitated, more unpredictable. "He's trying to reach the maternity ward," Agent Walsh reported. "All elevators have been disabled and stairwell access is blocked, but he's not accepting that he can't get through." "What if he tries to hurt other patients?" Sarah asked. "We have agents positioned at every critical location," Agent Walsh assured her. "But Mrs. Mitchell, you need to understand that Derek is completely focused on finding you. Other people are obstacles to him, not targets." Sarah watched her husband's increasingly frantic movements on the security screens and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Fear, certainly, but also pity and a strange sense of grief for the man she had thought she married. That person had probably never existed, but she had loved the illusion enough to build her life around it. "Derek," she said into the phone, "I want you to know that I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you, and I hope you get the help you need in prison, but I can't let you hurt me or our baby anymore." "You feel sorry for me?" Derek's voice rose to a shout that echoed through the hospital corridors. "I'm a millionaire businessman who built an empire from nothing, and you feel sorry for me. You're a man who destroyed his own life through greed and violence," Sarah replied. "Your empire was built on lies and theft. Your success was an illusion that couldn't last." The truth of her words seemed to penetrate Derek's defenses in a way that legal threats and federal agents couldn't. On the security monitors, he stopped moving and stood perfectly still in the hospital corridor, as if her assessment had physically struck him. "Sarah," he said quietly, "please don't let them take me. Please don't let our daughter grow up thinking her father was a criminal." For a moment, Sarah heard echoes of the man she had fallen in love with, vulnerable, needing her support, asking for her help. But this time, she recognized the manipulation embedded in his plea. "Derek, I can't save you from the consequences of your choices. I can only save myself and our baby." The sound of heavy footsteps and shouted commands came through both the phone connection and Agent Walsh's radio simultaneously. "FBI, put your hands where we can see them." On the security monitors, Sarah watched federal agents surround Derek in the hospital corridor. He looked small and defeated, no longer the commanding presence who had dominated her life for 2 years. "Derek Mitchell, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, domestic violence, and federal witness intimidation." The phone call ended as Derek was handcuffed and led away, but Sarah could see his arrest playing out on multiple security screens. The man who had controlled every aspect of her existence was being processed like any other criminal. Read his rights and searched for weapons while hospital staff watched from safe distances. "It's over," Agent Walsh said simply. "Derek Mitchell is in federal custody and will be transferred to a detention facility pending trial." "Mrs. Mitchell, You and your baby are safe. Sarah stared at the monitors showing empty hospital corridors where Derek had been just moments before. 2 years of fear and control and gradual erosion of her self-worth had ended with handcuffs and federal agents, as if the nightmare had simply evaporated under the harsh light of legal reality. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus sat down beside her and took her hand. "Now you heal. Now you rebuild your life. Now you become the mother your daughter deserves, free from fear and manipulation." Rebecca looked up from her tablet with a satisfied expression. "And now Derek faces the full consequences of his crimes. Based on the evidence we've compiled, he's looking at 25 to 30 years in federal prison. He'll never hurt you again." Sarah. As federal agents secured the hospital and began the process of returning it to normal operations, Sarah felt something inside her chest that she barely recognized. It took her several minutes to identify the sensation as hope. Not just hope that things might get better, but certainty that the worst was finally over. Her daughter would never know the fear that had defined the last months of Sarah's pregnancy. The baby would grow up free from Derek's violence and manipulation, surrounded by people who understood that love meant protection rather than control. The reckoning had come, and Sarah had survived it. 6 months later, autumn leaves swirled outside the courthouse windows as Sarah Mitchell sat in the gallery watching Derek's sentencing hearing. At 8.5 months pregnant, she felt her daughter moving restlessly inside her, as if the baby could sense the significance of this moment. Today would mark the final chapter of Derek's legal case, and the last time Sarah would ever have to see the man who had nearly destroyed her life. Derek looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit and shackles, a far cry from the confident millionaire who had once commanded every room he entered. Federal prosecution had stripped away his wealth, his freedom, and his carefully constructed facade, revealing the desperate criminal underneath. As Sarah watched him shuffle to the defendant's table, she felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that this chapter of her life was finally ending. "Your Honor," the federal prosecutor began, "Derek Mitchell stands before this court as a man who systematically destroyed the lives of everyone who trusted him. He stole millions of dollars from investors, abused his pregnant wife, and threatened federal witnesses. We ask for the maximum sentence allowed under federal guidelines." Surety, Rebecca Morrison sat beside Sarah, her presence both protective and reassuring. "How are you feeling?" she whispered. "Ready for it to be over," Sarah replied quietly. "Ready to stop being Derek Mitchell's victim and start being Emma's mother." Emma Rose Mitchell was due in 3 weeks, and Sarah had spent the past months preparing for single motherhood with the support system she had rebuilt around herself. Marcus had helped her find a beautiful apartment in a safe neighborhood, far from the luxury building where Derek had controlled every aspect of her existence. Mrs. Thompson had become a surrogate grandmother, offering wisdom and babysitting services with the enthusiasm of someone who had longed for family connections. The judge reviewed Derek's case with the methodical thoroughness that federal sentencing required. "Mr. Mitchell, you have been convicted of 27 felony counts, including fraud, money laundering, domestic violence, and witness intimidation. The financial damage to your victims exceeds $30 million. The psychological damage to your wife and unborn child is immeasurable." Derek's lawyer made a perfunctory plea for leniency, citing his client's previously clean record and potential for rehabilitation. But the evidence against Derek was overwhelming, and his behavior during arrest and prosecution had shown no remorse or acceptance of responsibility. "Derek Mitchell," the judge continued, "you are sentenced to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $32 million to your victims." Sarah felt her daughter kick vigorously as the sentence was announced, as if Emma was celebrating her freedom from a father who would never have the opportunity to hurt her. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that Derek's own crimes had ensured their daughter would grow up without his toxic influence. As court officers led Derek away, he turned to look at Sarah one final time. She met his gaze without flinching, no longer the frightened woman who had apologized for breathing too loudly. Derek had taken 2 years of her life, but she wouldn't give him another moment of her fear. "It's finished," Rebecca said as they left the courthouse. "Derek Mitchell can never hurt you or Emma again." Marcus was waiting for them on the courthouse steps, his familiar presence a reminder of the safety net that had made Sarah's recovery possible. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" Free, Sarah said simply. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. 3 weeks later, Sarah went into labor at Manhattan General Hospital, the same place where her nightmare with Derek had ended and her new life had begun. Marcus delivered his goddaughter with the skill of a surgeon and the tenderness of a grandfather, while Mrs. Thompson held Sarah's hand and offered encouragement. Emma Rose Mitchell entered the world at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Healthy and perfect, and completely unaware that her birth marked the beginning of a life free from the violence that had threatened her in the womb. She had her mother's dark hair and her grandfather's determined chin, and when she opened her eyes for the first time, Sarah saw nothing but possibility. "She's beautiful," Marcus said, placing Emma in Sarah's arms. "Your parents would be so proud of both of you." Sarah looked down at her daughter and felt a love so pure and protective that it made her previous understanding of the emotion seem pale by comparison. This tiny person would never know fear as a constant companion, would never learn to make herself smaller to avoid triggering someone's anger, would never apologize for existing. "Hello, Emma," Sarah whispered. "You're safe now. You're so loved, and you're completely safe." Mrs. Thompson dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, overcome with emotion at witnessing the continuation of life after so much trauma. "She's perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect." Over the following months, Sarah settled into the rhythm of new motherhood with the support of her chosen family. Marcus took his role as surrogate grandfather seriously, spoiling Emma with toys and books while teaching Sarah about child development and nutrition. Mrs. Thompson became Emma's official babysitter, providing childcare when Sarah returned to school to complete her social work degree. Sarah had decided to specialize in domestic violence counseling, using her own experience to help other women recognize and escape abusive relationships. The work was challenging, but deeply fulfilling, transforming her trauma into a tool for healing others. "I used to think strength meant enduring everything silently," Sarah told her first support group of abuse survivors. "Now I know strength means asking for help when you need it, believing in your own worth when others try to diminish it, and choosing to heal rather than harbor hatred." The women in the group listened with the intense attention of people who recognized truth in her words. Some were still trapped in abusive relationships, gathering courage for escape. Others were newly free but struggling with the aftermath of trauma. All of them needed to hear that survival was possible, that life after abuse could be not just bearable but beautiful. Emma thrived in the environment of love and stability that Sarah had created for them. At 6 months old, she was a happy baby who smiled easily and reached for strangers without fear, a stark contrast to the anxious child she might have become in Derek's household. "She's going to be a strong woman," Mrs. Thompson observed during one of their regular dinners together. "Just like her mother." "I hope she never needs the kind of strength I had to develop," Sarah replied. "I hope she grows up knowing she deserves to be treated with love and respect, so she never accepts anything less." Marcus raised his wine glass in a toast. "To Emma Rose Mitchell, who will grow up knowing her own worth because her mother fought for both of their freedom." As they clinked glasses, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit, convinced that her situation was hopeless and that she deserved the treatment she received. Tonight, she sat in her own apartment, surrounded by people who loved her, raising a daughter who would never know the fear that had once defined Sarah's existence. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been months of therapy to unravel the psychological damage Derek had inflicted, legal proceedings to recover stolen assets, and the constant work of rebuilding her sense of self-worth. But every difficult day had been worth it for moments like this, when she could look at Emma sleeping peacefully and know that her daughter's future was unlimited. Sometimes Sarah thought about Derek in his federal prison cell, serving a sentence that would keep him locked away until Emma was nearly 30 years old. She felt no hatred toward him anymore, only pity for a man who had destroyed his own life through greed and violence. His choices had consequences, and those consequences would ensure that he could never hurt another woman the way he had hurt her. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Just how different everything is now," Sarah said. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine a life without Derek's control and anger. Now I can't imagine going back to that darkness." "You'll never have to," Mrs. Thompson said firmly. "You've built something beautiful here, something real and lasting. As the evening wound down and Emma stirred from her nap, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the people who had helped her escape Derek's web of manipulation and abuse. Marcus's wealth and connections had provided practical resources, but his love and support had given her something more valuable, the reminder that she was worth protecting and defending. Mrs. Thompson's courage in recording Derek's assault had provided crucial evidence, but her ongoing friendship had shown Sarah what healthy relationships looked like. Rebecca Morrison's legal expertise had dismantled Derek's defenses, but her fierce advocacy had demonstrated that some people would fight for justice even when it didn't benefit them personally. Most importantly, Sarah had learned to trust her own instincts again, to believe her own perceptions, and to value her own well-being. The woman who had once apologized for existing had become someone who advocated for herself and others, someone who understood that true love meant freedom rather than possession. Emma woke up and immediately reached for her mother, her small hands grasping at Sarah's face with the complete trust that only children possess. As Sarah lifted her daughter and felt the warm weight of that tiny body against her chest, she understood that this was what she had been fighting for all along, not just her own freedom, but the chance to give Emma a different kind of life entirely. "Hello, beautiful girl," Sarah murmured into Emma's soft hair. "Mama's here. Mama's always going to be here." Outside the apartment windows, the city continued its endless rhythm of movement and change. But inside their small space, Sarah and Emma existed in a bubble of safety and love that no one could threaten or destroy. The nightmare was over, and the rest of their lives stretched ahead like an open road leading toward whatever future they chose to create. Some fairy tales end with the princess marrying the prince, but better stories end with the princess discovering she never needed rescuing. She just needed to remember her own power. And sometimes, having a billionaire godfather who believes in you doesn't hurt either. As Emma drifted back to sleep in her mother's arms, Sarah looked around at the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage and felt something she had almost forgotten was possible: complete and utter peace. They were safe, they were loved, and they were free to become whoever they wanted to be. The millionaire who had pushed his pregnant wife down hospital stairs was spending his nights in a federal prison cell, but the surgeon who had been her billionaire godfather was reading bedtime stories to his great goddaughter, while her mother planned a future filled with endless possibilities. And in the end, that made all the difference in the world.